avoid recordings of pieces you're playing. Unless the composer themselves has recorded it, then that's different. Just play every phrase as you'd sing it in the shower. Do everything. If you wouldn't do that rubato singing that phrase yourself, don't do it. That means you don't believe it. It's not sincere. I think sincerity is what I'm really talking about.
Stephen Isserlis, I would say, is equally at home, as they say, all the way from the Baroque to the modern age. He has influenced cello playing and music making in more ways than one over the past few decades. Naturally, he appears with the world's leading orchestras, the Berlin Philharmonic, the Los Angeles, etc., etc. He has chamber music all over the world with wonderful colleagues, festival curations, and all the rest. But beyond being a wonderful cellist, beyond being a probing musician, he brings an intellectual rigor to his interpretations, an intellectual approach combined with depth of heart, and of course a singing and most appealing cello tone that makes for quite an irresistible combination, if I may say so. I would also say that I'm thrilled to have him here because we have been talking over the course of the past few months, and finally I just said, Stephen Isserlis, can we do a conversation and talk about some of your feelings about music? This person, I have to say, has more feelings about music, the world of culture at large, more than most of his colleagues, if I may be so brash as to say so. In any case, I couldn't be more thrilled that finally, here on the first Friday of 2024, I've nailed him down, and he's right here with us. Stephen Isserlis, welcome.
Thank you. I could listen to you all night.
Well, we can turn you off and turn it right back, and I can give a 56-minute introduction if you wish. You wouldn't need anything else then.
Fine by me.
So, I'm curious because not everybody, for example, is bold enough as you are to not just play concerts, but then take up the pen and write some things down and publish articles here and there. I wonder how the intellectual side, the analytical side, and the sort of urge to write things down, write articles, children's books about music, which are extremely fun and wonderful. I wish I had those when I was a kid, although I had other good stuff. Where does this all come into the mix? Give us a little picture.
It's all the same, really. I mean, it's all communicating about music as opposed to communicating the music itself. But it's very much of a piece. I've written 4 books now. One, as you say, 2 children's books, one advice for young musicians with a very good co-author called Robert Schumann, and then a book about the Bach suites. It's my most recent. That was a lockdown project. It saved me during lockdown. It's, I don't know, an intellectual, emotional, it's all the same thing. It's all about understanding music, I think. And I cannot understand a piece of music until I understand the form, because that's a way of getting into the composer's mind. And so I spend many hours at the piano looking at the scores of the pieces I'm playing, and just marking them up, marking my part up to remind me, because I have a terrible memory, remind myself what's going on in the piece, and then once I understand the form, the whole piece falls into place. And that's, the form, Debussy said that the form is the emotion. I'm not sure I could quite agree with that, but, the story is important. And then, of course, you don't understand the emotions of the story unless you understand the story itself. And I would say the form is the story, is the framework of the story.
Wondering when you decided you had to sit down at the piano and add that into the mix. When you realized, well, just playing the cello part by itself, or learning the orchestra part, or learning the piano part for a certain piece, when you actually said, I need to be at the keyboard.
I think I've always done it. Well, certainly since my 20s, I would say. I mean, I took piano lessons as a child, as people do, as everybody should, if they're going to be a musician, whatever instrument they play. I think it makes life much easier, even though I'm a very, very bad pianist, but still I can work at the piano. It's like, if you learn to play, you don't really just want to learn your part. You want to know what's going on. You want to know the whole play, the whole plot, and that involves the other characters. And I've always said, or not always said, but for a long time I've been saying, little soundbite, but it's true that all music is chamber music. And I really stick to that. Concertos, Dvorak concerto, for instance, as a cellist, that's chamber music on a very large scale, but it's absolutely chamber music. It's one voice talking to another. And that's what chamber music is. It's voices talking to each other, and concertos and Bach suites also voices talking to each other. Yeah, whatever it is, it's chamber music.
Why the need for children's books? I mean, they're so appealing, and like a lot of wonderful children's literature, actually, they're appealing to a large variety of audiences. I know I was doing some research about Leonard Bernstein's young people concerts because I had seen the movie Maestro, which came out recently, and I learned, much to my surprise, that 83% of the audiences were adults for the young people's concerts on television. And so here you are writing something directed at children, but certainly I think it strikes a chord in many people, myself included, because there's I think sincerity and a directness to the point and a lack of condescension that comes across in the book. So wasn't there enough written for kids about music? Well, why do you want to jump into the mix?
There really wasn't enough. I mean, my son now is 33 years old, but those books were written when he was a boy, and of course he heard all about music all the time. He was always listening to music. When he was little, he used to sit there listening to me practicing. Very sweet. Probably ruined his ears forever. But anyway, I just wanted a book about composers, because I talked to him so much about composers. I wanted him to read a book, and I couldn't find one that was. I found some nice fantasy books, like Beethoven Lives Next Door and whatever, things like that. They're fun, and he enjoyed those, and he enjoyed the tapes, but they're fantasy. And any factual book seemed very boring. So I just wanted to write. I just tried. First chapter I wrote was about Beethoven, and he seemed to like it, and then the publishers liked it, so I went ahead from there. It was really, as I think I say in the introduction, I suppose it comes from my teacher, Jane Cowan, who always made us feel as if the composers were living friends. They were really friends to us, and she used to tell funny stories about them, and somehow the music came more alive from the way she described the composers. And I suppose, if a child makes friends with composers, if that helps him sort of enjoy great music, learn to listen to great music and play great music, or just listen, that's fine. That's going to enrich their lives, and they'll have friends for life. Beethoven's never going to let you down. So yeah, and I wanted that for my son. I think other children maybe enjoyed it more than he did, but I think he quite enjoyed it. He was quite proud. In fact, it was dedicated to him. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I wonder if you could zoom out for a moment and shift gears a little bit. I am curious about. Yeah.
Zoom out.
I'm curious if you look at the way music was made 30, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, versus today. I wonder what's changed and what's different.
I think it's improved. I must say, generally, the level of musicianship. I mean, when I was studying I came from a very extreme, off-the-wall, tiny school. I mentioned my teacher, Jane Cowan. I mean, we were really isolated. Sometimes there was as few as 4 students at this school. We were in Scotland, at least for a couple of years. I was in Scotland with her, and she was extreme. But she was absolute idealist. She would have no truck with compromise. She hated virtually every sort of, every other school of music, and she felt she was fighting a battle for the innocence of music. So that was quite extreme. And then I went for a couple of years to Oberlin College in Ohio, and that was quite an eye-opener. But I do think that a lot of the teaching there was too practical. It was too competition based. I mean, I loved my teacher there, Mr. Kapuscinski. He was a lovely man and a very good teacher. But he did talk a lot about competitions, why you couldn't start a piece with an up bow because that wouldn't look good in a competition and things like that. I remember him saying that, and it was like a completely different language to me. It was probably very useful for me because it made me think more practically. But, music is not about competition. And very little of the teaching I heard about and the playing had anything to do with musical form or the deeper meaning of music. And I think now, people in those days, I knew some people who were actually ashamed at the fact if they had to play chamber music. They thought, oh, that means I won't make it as a soloist, which I found pretty mind-boggling then. And it's just not the case now. Young people almost always play chamber music. And I think there are more truly musical teachers around, I think. And, there's a lot of young people, I think, are really idealists now. And I think possibly more than then. I don't know. But of course, pre-Second World War, that's really my era. Those are the players I love most. Basically, Casals, of course, Thibaut, Enescu, all these people. Schnabel, of course, Rachmaninoff, all these people. I mean, they were just pure music. And I think the musical world lost that for a bit after the Second World War, just speaking of course, in very generalizations. It didn't completely, but I think some standards of musicianship went down. And hopefully, I don't know. Then you always have people like Radu Lupu who were pure musicians. So I don't know what the future holds, but I hope it's a bit better than there was a sort of darkish period, I think, when I was in my early 20s. And I think things are better now.
I want to, as I say, drill down on something you just said, because pre-war, pre-Second World War, a lot of names you mentioned, and also some of the generation who was also playing a lot in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, who had the sort of heyday in those few decades right after the war. And then a lot of those early 20th century people were already, I suppose, getting older by the time the 60s rolled around and stereo recordings started and all that. But I want to understand what your analysis is, because I know you think more about the history of music and you think more about music than most people. I'm not just saying that. I really think that's true. What your analysis is about what happened to the personalities of musicians around the period of 1930 to 1950.
Well, they're very different from 1930s and 1950s. As I said, 1930s for me, I think, would have been heyday time.
Fine, let's talk 30s.
Okay, so the Casals, Enescu, Thibaut people, I mean, partly Casals and Enescu were composers, especially Enescu, of course, Kreisler. It hadn't quite separated church and state, performer and composer to the same extent. So I think they thought more like composers. And I think after the war, you got these huge halls being built, just too big for really intimate music making. And people just became obsessed with playing loudly and impressing rather than moving their listeners. That's how I feel. And of course, as I say, it's a huge generalization. But if you think of maybe the two greatest figures in 20th century cello playing, the most important, the most famous, Casals, and then you think of Rostropovich, and of course Rostropovich was a colossus, and his charisma, I mean, I of course knew him, I was lucky enough to play with him as conductor. His charisma was amazing, but the actual musical values, if the two of them, say, played Beethoven or Bach, were so different. And I think that's, Rostropovich was really out there to sock it to the public, to, make sure he makes a huge sound as possible and, make this impression on the audience that they'd be open-mouthed. And Casals for me, it's more about he's bringing people in and he's telling them about the inner message. He's sort of delivering the inner message of the music. And that, for me, is more important. I mean, I'm not criticizing Rostropovich. He was amazing. Of course, he was a hero to me when I was growing up. But it's just the sort of the ethos now. Casals and those people attract me more because I think they're more inside the composer's mind in a way and less about performance.
How much do you think all of this is related to the ways in which recordings changed, the ways in which one was captured and preserved stereophonically or monophonically, as it were, for generations to come? You know, if we were able in some parallel universe to hear a recording of Casals, the same exact quality as a Rostropovich recording, what would that change?
Nothing. I don't think it'll change much. I mean, there's some very good, unfortunately, very old, good quality Casals recordings. But I think recordings have been, I'm thrilled that recordings exist. And I think they probably had a very good effect on playing at first. If you listen to the generation of cellists before Casals, who recorded, you know, early in the 20th century, and then you listen to Casals, there's a huge difference. I mean, some of them are quite shocking, just the way they slide from note to note, which sounds pretty bloody awful, I think. I mean, some of them I really like, but that habit, I think they just didn't hear it. And then presumably when they heard their own recordings, I don't know, it must have had an effect. Anyway, the next generation did not do that to anything like the same extent. On the other hand, I think recordings, partly because players, again, I mean, it's probably not true so much of Casals' concerto recordings, but the generations after the Second World War, their recordings, you get the solo instrument sort of right by the microphone and the orchestra in the background. And that builds up false expectations for a concert, I think. And I think is wrong. So it's in that way, and the sort of, I suppose, the technical, they say technical perfection, that doesn't mean anything, but the accuracy. People perhaps, you know, got too obsessed with that. I mean, one can tell from the live performances from pre-war players that, you know, if there was the occasional wrong note, it didn't matter. And maybe because of recordings, it became a bit of an obsession after the war. But having said which, Casals' technique when he was a young man is astonishing. And so is Rachmaninoff, and, you know, so are many of them.
Yeah, it's very interesting just to think about the way in which these people would be received today. I mean, I through tonebase especially, I interact with a lot of younger players. I'm 34. I interact with a lot of people who are, you know, in school now. A lot of 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, or 18-year-olds, and I'm always curious. Well, I've always been curious, who are people listening to? Because when I was a student and coming up, I was just obsessed, and this was just on the cusp of YouTube, maybe, but certainly no Spotify. So certainly really in the heart of CDs, and I, you know, was just obsessed with collecting recordings and memorizing the timings and memorizing how Fournier sounded differently on the Fifth Bach Suite Sarabande and Gendron or whatever, and just drilling in all this information. You couldn't listen to enough, and spent school every night, you know, late at night with friends listening to music. And so I always ask people in school now, or younger people, well, who do you listen to, and what do you listen to, and why? And one student said, goes to a big music school in the States and studies with a big teacher, and said, well, occasionally I listen to Rostropovich, but that's really getting pretty far back, you know. And I said, what about your friends? What about so your face there? Of course, yeah, I made that FaceTime send. I said, what about your friends? What about anybody put on a Fournier recording, maybe, or a Feuermann or Piatigorsky? Nothing. Just absolute silence. And so, you know, as I say, the shocked but not surprised kind of reaction. I'm
a bit shocked and surprised. And even those three you mentioned, for me, are modern players compared to the ones I really love most. with some exceptions.
But
I mean, not for Daniel Shafran, but that's different.
What do you say to that? I mean, what's your? Because I mean,
I think it's a pity, but I don't think they should be listening to recordings at all of pieces they're playing. I think it's very dangerous listening to recordings of pieces you're playing. You should never listen. I mean, of course, we all listen. That's how we got inspired, was by listening to recordings when that's what made us want to play our instruments, etc. And that's absolutely natural. And I listen to recordings of all the time, but not of pieces I'm playing, because you're going to start imitating. It's impossible not to. And as I very often said, you have a chance to talk to God. Why talk to the vicar? As in, God is the composer. They're giving you the message direct. Why go and get it from somebody else? So I think, avoid recordings of pieces you're playing. Unless the composer themselves has recorded it, then that's different. But then I think you have to listen. But presuming that not to be the case with Bach and Beethoven and so on, Schumann, so on, don't listen to the recordings. Look at the score. Just, get the message direct.
Now, the classic response to that is, just to play devil's advocate, well, chances are you'll have heard one recording of the piece, so whether or not you know it, you're just imitating that one recording that's stuck in the back of your mind somewhere.
No, it's not the same as if you listen to recordings again and again and again. That's when they really stick. Well, I don't know about other people, but for me, one listening would probably do very little. And you can erase it. But if you keep listening, if you listen as you're learning the piece to those recordings, that's a problem. And of course, it happens all the time. I teach enough. I see the cliches in the standard cello repertoire just coming again and again. I say, what's written? I say, you've been listening, haven't you? Yes. The composer is more important than the player.
I was very lucky to have had a wonderful teacher once who just imparted in me. So he was from an orchestral career through and through. So those people are particularly about the score. But he just imparted in me because I was mucking around with some concerto, and he said, you really got to understand, do what's on the page first. And you have to hear what's on the page. And then see what happens after that. But it's just, and it sounds so simple and it sounds so trite, but it's just I think, so important for every musician to actually see, like, oh, that's a whole note. That means we're going to count to 4 and then move on. There's simple things that...
but, if you're playing Baroque music, of course, it's not, you don't play exactly what's written on the page. There's double dotting and ornamentation and such things, and classical music too. But yes, I agree with your teacher. But also, I always say, just play every phrase as you'd sing it in the shower. Do everything. If you wouldn't do that rubato singing that phrase yourself, don't do it. That means you don't believe it. It's not sincere. And I think sincerity is what I'm really talking about. Just absolutely sincere performances, playing the music exactly as you feel it. And there's an informed feeling because you have to know the score deeply. It's not just as if you were sight reading it, but once you know the piece and you understand what you think the composer is trying to say, then just do it. Don't feel you have to distort. You have to do slides you don't believe in, rubato you don't believe in because other people do it, or you think it sounds more impressive. Just have the nerve to play simply.
What bothers you right now in music?
In musical performance or in music?
In musical performance in 2024. Well, it's the beginning of the year, so let's say 2023.
Well, I'm not... What bothers me? Only sort of, as I say, just lack of genuine love of music sometimes, I feel, in performances. And I feel people... doing things for career reasons rather than really musical reasons. And it bothers me when I keep reading on all over social media, I'm so excited to be playing with this orchestra. I'm so excited to be here. boast, boast, boast. What about the people who don't have the dates with orchestra? It's not fair on them to have to read this. There's a lot of boasting goes on social media, and I do find that embarrassing and cliched. So excited. I think if you hear me saying that, feel free to shoot me. Even if I am excited about some things, which I do, of course, get, but I don't want to boast about them on social media.
So that's something. Okay, so that's a personality thing. Okay, and I'll throw into the mix. Quote, I'm thrilled to announce ... But okay, but other than that, what about in terms of the music making? What in terms of the music making? You mentioned a lack of love, a lack of sincerity. Are there things that you hear today that bother you that didn't exist 30 years ago?
I think 30 years ago was a pretty bad time, actually. Hang on, how old am I? I'm much too old. Maybe I mean 40 years ago. I mean, the way people would play Mozart and Haydn things before the original instrument movement had really taken root. And also how they played it on the original instrument movement when it first started, I thought was pretty bad, because there used to be such a low technical standard, and they thought because they'd read books they could get away with that. And now what I'm trying to be positive for once. I think now actually the two have met much more. If you hear many modern symphony orchestras playing Mozart or Haydn, it's beautiful. It's not exaggerated. It's not sort of wallowing in vibrato and lush sound, and and similarly, the original instrument orchestras are so much better than they were. It's really unlike me to be so positive, but I am positive about that. Whether there are the great musicians around, certainly not in the numbers they were, which is a pity, of course, a huge pity. But I think some things have certainly improved from 40 years ago. There's a lot of me playing, which I cannot stand. It's where people, spill their guts out, and perfectly, innocent, childlike, happy music, like so much Haydn, so much Mozart, so much Beethoven, and these pained faces and this sort of massive vibrato on string players, and sort of loud, and sort of rubato just to show how profound and emotional they are, rather than as I think. Of course, there's been huge changes in sound worlds and style and everything. But I think if Mozart suddenly turned up today and you asked him to sing a phrase of his as he would sing it, I'm very sure that it would sound pretty similar to the way we'd sing it today. There's natural phrasing, and that I hear rather little of that natural phrasing these days. I don't say I never hear it, but I don't hear it as much as I'd like to.
It's
Is that okay? Is that negative enough?
Oh, well, we're just getting started now. No, it's so interesting to hear, because everybody, I think everybody is told, play it how you'd sing it. I think, but then or listen to great singers is something that
that's different. That's very different.
Which is very different. So let's talk about those two differences, because play how you'd sing it, and you said in the bathtub or in the shower or wherever you sing, meaning in the most natural, uninhibited way you can. When I assume that's what you mean by that. Then we have the listen to great singers thing, and listen to great singers, and then play it how they would sing it, which can be very inspiring, of course, but also be very misleading in a way.
It's too complicated. I'm saying play it as you would sing it, not as somebody else would sing it. Yeah, of course, one can learn a lot from listening to great singers, great pianists, great conductors, great instrumentalists of all sorts. But the point I'm making is play it as you would sing it yourself. So it really comes from inside, and it's honest. And, that's something different, listening to singers. And it's wonderful. I was brought up listening to Fischer-Dieskau, and just to get to know the song repertoire a bit, although I know far too little, was wonderful. And it does help you understand the language of the composer, of course, when you hear them certain music to words. Of course, it helps you when you have no words, unless, to understand what emotions they connected with what music. That is helpful. But no, it's different from what I was saying. I'm saying play it, sing it to yourself, then play it just like that. You don't have to do any more or any less than that.
Let's talk about this volume thing, because now I regret that when I was a student, I never went to play for you in Prashikova. I never had a masterclass with you, but lots and lots of friends have, and lots of colleagues, and I've heard about your class and everything. And so volume is something that comes up, and it's something I think you mentioned probably 6 times in the past 35 minutes, the word volume. What is it about volume that people get so hung up on? So concert halls got bigger, and people said, now I have to play to fill 4,000 seats or something. And that happened, and now there's an obsession with volume, or maybe not now, but say in the past few decades. I'm using this 30-year thing, but maybe it's 40 or 50 years. It's certainly more than 30 years. Obsession with sound quantity. When and how did this come about, and what did it do to what people had to say from the inside out?
Well, I say people started to shout rather than speak. I mean, for me, of course, I've often been told I play too softly. I try not to. And I think I'm better than I was at that. But I don't know. I just do not want to play a phrase as if I was shouting when the phrase is intimate. I would much rather bring people in than go and sort of in their face, so depending on the music, or some music. And of course, I make no secret of the fact I much prefer gut strings for most music, but not all. And something like this month, I'll be playing Fauré chamber music, of course, gut strings for that, and Haydn concerto, gut strings, but then I'll change cellos and play Kabalevsky concerto on steel strings, it's better. So it does depend on the music.
Stephen Isserlis, I can't let you go with bringing up a name who came up once just in passing today. With it's the name of Daniel Shafran, the great Soviet cellist, who was rather comparatively unknown to Western audiences compared to obviously Rostropovich or someone like that, but a massive name in cello playing as someone who when I was at school, I went to a school that was dominated by a cellist who was the absolute antithesis to Shafran, and it was always my dream to start a Daniel Shafran fan club and put up big signs around the school, but I didn't do that. This was the school where Janos Starker roamed large. I don't think
I have to say, I love Starker. He was such a wonderful man. We got on so well, he and I.
It's amazing, right?
Not agree about Shafran.
Tell me about your love for Daniel Shafran.
I don't know. I first heard him when I was about 12 years old. My teacher gave a talk about great cellists, and she put on this Daniel Shafran. She loved him at that point. And I just flipped. I thought, this is like nothing I've ever heard before. And then she really regretted having introduced me to his playing, because I listened to him every day. My father was Russian, and so he was a scientist, and he was asked to host a scientist from the Soviet Union. And she came to dinner, and I asked her if she could get me any records of Daniel Shafran. So she sent some. They arrived from the Soviet Union, which was then like another planet. And it was so exciting. And I used to listen every day, and I started imitating him. This is why I know how dangerous it is. I think still probably when I play Russian music, his influence is still very much there. But it's fine now. What about him? I just love, talk about freedom and sincerity. Yes, he gets exaggerated sometimes. Of course, I don't love everything he did, but at his best, again, he's flying. And I love that. There's no sense of effort. He really is like a folk singer who plays the cello. He has this complete sincerity and this elegance, this wit to his playing, this heartfelt lyricism. And it's really strange that his reputation has grown so much since he died. Unfortunately, it's not much good to him. I went to his apartment after he died. I met him in Moscow and then twice in London. But I didn't go to his apartment in Moscow until after he died. And It was in the suburbs. I mean, think of Rostropovich sort of owning huge houses all over the world. And Shafran had this apartment right out in the suburbs, sort of quite small apartment. Did make me think. But I don't know, I was so thrilled to meet him. And it's the only time in my life, first time, I had dinner with him twice, and first time is the only time in my life I forgot to eat. I was just so focused on him. Yeah, he was a very adorable man as well. I mean, very elegant, not at all like you'd think from his playing, nothing wild. Anyway, he's been a hero of mine. He still is a hero of mine. I had to get rid of some of my imitation of him. It was too much. But I still love him, as I love, Casals and he, for me, are the two big people. I don't listen to them playing pieces I'm playing myself, but if I do go to Cellis, it's usually those two.
At this stage, do you still listen to recordings? You still put on a record of an Escu or a Thibault or a Casals, just for pleasure?
Absolutely. I'm listening all the time. I listen obsessively, like to a piece if I hear it and love it, like Messe des Pêcheurs. Oh, sorry, that's terrible French. By Fauré and his friend Messager. I just discovered it and I had to listen to it at least 10 times. It's so beautiful. YouTube's wonderful for that. It's great.
Someone sent me a recording recently, a rare recording. Well, the word rare, okay, if it's on YouTube, but you know what I mean. Things used to be rare, of Scheherazade with Oistrakh as concertmaster. And
oh, wow.
It's just incredible. I mean, it's just to hear the very first solo, which comes pretty early on in the piece. From the first millisecond of that E, you hear, oh my, you're just grabbed in a way. And just the idea that Oistrakh is playing these concertmaster solos is pretty unbelievable. Anybody can find it. Just type in Rimsky-Korsakov Oistrakh in YouTube and it'll come up.
Huberman played. I know Huberman played the solo Missa Solemnis in Vienna before the war. And Scheherazade. I know Josh Bell, he was dying to play it, and he did play it. He toured with an orchestra from Australia, I think, playing it. He loved it, doing it. I've always wanted to play the solo in the second Brahms piano concerto. Haven't done it yet. I did get to play the solo, which isn't really a solo, but I played it as one in the slow movement to the Schumann violin concerto, which is a gorgeous piece. I even got to record that. That was a thrill.
Well, some orchestra out there, please invite Stephen Isserlis to play the third movement, even if it's only the third movement of the second piano concerto of Brahms. I think
the right pianist.
Yeah, I'm the right pianist. Yeah, we would be deeply appreciative of that. So would the analysts of recorded music going forward. Steve,
I did just get the cellist of the Berlin Phil. That was quite a thrill just before Christmas, because we went and we had this concert for humanity. We had Israeli and Palestinian peace groups and singers all on stage together. And then there was various things. Then it finished with my friend Amichai Gross, who's first violist of the Berlin Phil, playing Kol Nidra by Bruch with Petrenko conducting. And they said, would I sit in? And then they insisted I led the cellos, which I hadn't played in an orchestra for many years. I thought it was quite something to sit in as first cellist of that orchestra. But it was fun, actually. Well, it wasn't a fun occasion, it was a moving occasion, but it was very rewarding. So then the orchestra was lovely.
Well, Stephen Isserlis, I suppose on that note, as we start 2024, and I wish you and everybody else more fun and more moving and more rewarding. 3 adjectives you just use in succession. Occurrences on and off stage. And as people know, this conversation will be archived and will live as a video on the site. You can rewatch it. And Stephen Isserlis, truly, I can't thank you enough. It's just been a wonderful pleasure to have you. And hats off to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if I said anything to offend anybody, I'm sorry.